The first ramp dropped at 6:30 on the morning of June 6, 1944. The men at the front of the boat were dead before the ramp touched the water. This is not a figure of speech. At several sectors along Omaha Beach, German machine gun positions above the bluffs had range cards calibrated to the waterline and had been tracking the approaching landing craft for minutes before H-hour. When the steel ramps lowered and presented the men inside as a single concentrated target, the fire that came back was not random. It was pre-aimed, pre-calibrated, and already in motion before the first soldier stepped forward. What followed in the next 60 minutes is among the most documented and the most difficult to fully describe hours in American military history. The beach itself was 5 miles of curved sand backed by bluffs rising 30 to 40 meters above the waterline. The bluffs gave the German defenders something that no amount of preliminary bombardment had neutralized: height, cover, and overlapping fields of fire that reached every point on the sand below. 5 draws cut through the bluffs to the interior, the only exits from the beach, the objectives that every planning document had identified as essential. By 6:31, every one of those exits was still in German hands, held by defenders who had absorbed the morning's air and naval bombardment and emerged from their positions ready. The sea was also wrong. A longshore current running from west to east along the beach face was pulling the landing craft sideways as they made their final approach. Companies trained for months to land at specific sectors arrived in different ones. The range cards the German positions held had been prepared for the points where those companies were supposed to arrive. Some units drifted into gaps between strong points and survived better than they had any reason to expect. Others arrived exactly where the Germans had anticipated and paid for that precision with men who had never been to France before that morning. At Dog Green Sector, Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, hit the beach directly in front of a fortified position that had survived both the bombing and the naval guns intact. The company had trained together for months. Many of the men knew one another from home. When the ramps dropped, fire came simultaneously from the front and from both flanks. Within minutes, Company A had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The men who survived the first minutes did so largely because the number of casualties around them made them difficult to distinguish from the dead. This was happening, with variations, across the entire length of the beach. The noise alone defied description in every account survivors later gave. Not the noise of artillery ranges, not the noise they had trained near. It was continuous and total in a way that removed the ability to think in sentences. Men communicated by pulling on sleeves, by pointing, by reading mouths that could not be heard over the sound. Smoke from burning landing craft mixed with the haze from the naval bombardment and turned the morning into a gray corridor with no clear walls and no ceiling. The beach, seen from inside the first hour of its assault, was not a battle in any shape that training had prepared them to recognize. It was a condition. The landing craft carried approximately 36 men each. When a ramp lowered and the first men fell, the men behind them faced a choice that was not a real choice. Go forward through the bodies, or stay on a burning boat. Most went forward. Some jumped over the sides into water deeper than anyone had told them it would be, pulled down by equipment weighing more than 70 pounds, and did not come back up. The beach they were trying to reach was less than 200 yards away. For the men in the water, those 200 yards had become a different kind of distance than the word had ever previously contained. Combat engineers had landed with the first wave for the specific purpose of clearing lanes through the beach obstacles before the follow-on waves arrived. The plan called for 16 cleared gaps within the first 30 minutes, enough lanes to allow the second and third waves to come ashore without being destroyed by the mines attached to the steel beach obstacles. In practice, the engineers arrived at the same moment as the infantry, under the same fire, with the same conditions. They worked with demolition charges in chest-deep water, under direct fire from positions above. In the first hour of the assault, they cleared approximately 5 lanes instead of 16. Engineer casualties in those first 60 minutes were among the highest of any unit on any beach on June 6th. By 7 o'clock, 30 minutes into the assault, a pattern had established itself along the length of Omaha that would have been visible from above and was invisible from within. The men who had reached the seawall at the high tide line were alive and pinned down. The men who had not reached it were either casualties or still attempting the crossing. The sand between the waterline and the seawall was covered with abandoned equipment, bodies, and wounded men who could not be reached. Landing craft continued arriving from offshore and depositing more soldiers into the same space. There was almost no return fire from the beach. This is the detail that appears most consistently in survivor accounts trying to explain what that hour felt like from inside it. The weapons that should have suppressed the bluffs, the DD tanks, now at the bottom of the channel after sinking in the rough water on their approach. The artillery pieces lost when their landing craft struck obstacles. The fire support that the planners had believed would exist were absent. The men on the beach had rifles, wet ammunition, and an understanding that the gap between what they had been told to expect and what was actually happening was too large to reason around. Whether this constitutes the single most brutal hour of the Second World War is a question the title asks, and history does not answer cleanly. The Eastern Front consumed lives across months, and at a scale that makes any 60-minute window difficult to isolate. Stalingrad, Kursk, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Peleliu, each compressed catastrophe into spaces and durations that resist comparison. The worst hours of those battles left marks that have not faded. What Omaha Beach at 6:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944 was, specifically and precisely, was this. Roughly 2,000 men on an open stretch of sand under coordinated fire from intact, prepared positions above them, without the armored support they had been promised, without the gaps through the obstacles that had been planned, trying to cross 200 yards that had become the most dangerous ground on Earth that morning. By 7:30, the beach was still stalled. The hour had not ended in any meaningful sense when the clock said it had. The men who had landed at 6:30 were still there. The ones who were alive were still at the seawall or in the surf. The ones who had moved beyond it were the ones who had stood up in the absence of any reasonable expectation that standing up would help, and moved anyway. The hour at 6:30 did not end with a breakthrough. It ended with that decision being made, one man at a time, up and down the length of the sand. Everything that came after, the bluffs taken, the draws forced, the beach secured by nightfall, came from that. Not from a plan that worked, from people who moved when the plan had not.